Big news for the 2024 election. It has nothing to do with Donald Trump or Joe Biden or Ron DeSantis. It has to do with the fight over control of the U.S. Senate. Ben Cardin, senator from Maryland, made this announcement earlier this week.
We'll have a lot more work to do during these next 2 years.
But Ben, I think it's time.
It is time. It is time. And when this term ends, it'll be my last years as an elected official. I will not seek reelection.
There you go.
Thank
That's a
you,
big
Maryland.
deal. And that whole it's time, it's time. He's 80 years old, a few months younger than Joe Biden. And there's his wife lovingly saying, it's time. Now, Ben Cardin joins two other Democrats, Debbie Stabenow of Michigan and Dianne Feinstein, although she was sort of dragged kicking and screaming away from running for reelection. But that's three Democrats in the Senate who have decided it's time. It's time to move on, all while President Biden decides he's ready for 4 more years. Joining us right now to analyze this generational shift in American politics is Matthew Foldy. He, of course, of the Spectator, I think, is where you're putting your shingle these days. Although I see you writing stuff all over the place, Foldy. Good for you. Thanks for joining us.
Well, great to be back with you as always. And I want to start by breaking some news.
Okay.
I will officially not be running for U.S. Senate in Maryland next year. I know that your viewers are desperate to know this, but as a 26-year-old, that would be wildly illegal.
Yes.
Let's just get that out of the way. The elephant in the room.
What's the word we're looking for? That would be unconstitutional, is what it
Yes.
would be. Yeah. Although you did run for Congress, 25-year-olds can run for Congress, and you ran for the Republican nomination in Maryland. So I'm still holding out for you, maybe against Chris Van Hollen, the other senator from Maryland. But this is kind of a big deal. I want to talk about Maryland in particular coming up in a bit, and Ben Cardin. But you've written at the Spectator about this larger umbrella topic here, which is, a lot of these older boomer politicians are recognizing that it's time to move on here. That's a good thing. We should encourage this.
So if you look at these people, I'll just throw out some names here: Nancy Pelosi, Steny Hoyer, Pat Leahy, Ben Cardin, Jim Clyburn, even Anthony Fauci, Dianne Feinstein. These people have a combined age of over 500 years old. And until a couple months ago, they were basically running the country. And we are seeing in real time a massive generational shift in the Democratic Party. Ben Cardin was saying it's time. Mrs. Cardin was saying it's time. Ben, what are these Democrats seeing that Joe Biden is somehow missing? At this point, he will be one of the last old men standing in the Democratic Party. And it's very possible that Tom Carper, a senator in Delaware, will also call it quits next year. So we're seeing this shift in real time. And Ben Cardin is the latest example of it.
There's also something else that's striking about Ben Cardin's announcement in particular. You just saw a little bit of it. When you see Ben Cardin, when you see Bernie Sanders giving a live television interview for 10, 15 minutes, these two guys are actually older than Joe. Well, Ben Cardin's a little younger. Bernie Sanders is actually older than Joe Biden. They seem more together. They seem more on top of it than Joe Biden does. I mean, there's 80 and then there's 80.
Well, that's exactly right. And Joe Biden will be 86 going on 800 in January 2029 if he completes an entire second term. And I was covering an event a couple weeks ago that Ben Cardin was speaking at. And you're right, he's 79, but he doesn't look, he could pass for 60, whereas Biden is 80 and could pass for 500.
In the larger scheme of things, though, this really is about control of the United States Senate. This is a legislative body, and I firmly believe that you need to vote for your party. Even if the nominee is not the perfect Republican or the perfect Democrat, it's all about numbers. And the way the numbers lay out right now for 2024, Matt Foldy, especially with these recent announcements of retirements, so you've got Democrats not running as incumbents, but with open seats, the map looks pretty good for Republicans, doesn't it?
And some of the states where Democrats are on defense include West Virginia and Ohio, where you have septuagenarians, Sherrod Brown and Joe Manchin. Now, I think Sherrod Brown is certainly obviously running for reelection. Joe Manchin is flirting with a third-party presidential bid. It's very possible, though, that Governor Jim Justice will scare him out of the race. But the Democratic Party's bench is not actually that robust. And I think one of the reasons that Biden is going full steam ahead for 2024 is who's the alternative? Really, the only options that are serious are Gavin Newsom, who just rolled off of the set of American Psycho J.B. Pritzker, who is presiding over Illinois and Chicago. This is not a serious candidate for national office. Pete Buttigieg, who presides over a train derailment today, and Kamala Harris. That's really their bench. So it's not actually that surprising that Democrats are saying, look, all these old senators are calling it quits, or we're throwing them off the cliff like Dianne Feinstein. But you know what, Joe? You're the best we've got.
Yeah. By the way, Chuck Schumer ain't no spring chicken either as the majority leader for the Democrats right now. And I doubt he'd enjoy being the minority leader should Republicans win the majority. Although, listen, we Republicans, we've got our own octogenarians. Mitch McConnell is positioned as the leader in the Senate for the Republicans. A lot of people think that maybe he should read the room.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see what happens on the GOP side. McConnell is up in 2026, and I think that his future in the Senate will probably be dictated somewhat about who is the next president. You know, if he has a partner in the White House, will he want to continue serving out? But I could see him saying after 2026, you know, I'm done. The presumption is that he likes Daniel Cameron, the Attorney General of Kentucky, who's currently embroiled in a messy primary for the governor's race there. I think if Republicans, you know, fumble the ball at the goal line and don't win the Kentucky gubernatorial seat next year, that would basically rule out McConnell retiring early, obviously, lest a Democratic governor pick his replacement in the U.S. Senate. But once you get below McConnell, the party leadership on the GOP side is much younger than the spring chickens of Dick Durbin and co. on the Democratic side.
Let's focus on Ben Cardin in particular, since you're a Maryland Republican and you focus on that state quite a bit, and it's right here in the shadow of the nation's capital. I was struck by the fact that Ben Cardin has been in elected office since 1967, Matt Foley. The Beatles were still together. In fact, they were just rolling out Sgt. Pepper's when Ben Cardin first won an election in Maryland. It's extraordinary, actually, if you think about somebody holding office either in the House of Delegates in Annapolis, then the House of Representatives, and then the United States Senate for that long. The founders never intended this.
That's why I'm actually surprised that Cardin called it quits. He doesn't know how to do anything else. And I think that if I were the White House, I would have been calling him every day saying, don't retire, or don't call it quits. Just run, win, then retire, because I think it's impossible to look at that Ben Cardin video and not think, okay, what is Joe Biden seeing that's different from what Ben Cardin is seeing? And I'm sure, obviously, we want to talk about the actual sort of future of that Senate race, but that's why I am surprised that Cardin is calling quits. What's he realistically going to do? Enjoy retirement? He doesn't know what that means.
Normally, it would just be a slam dunk that this would be a Democrat state. I don't think a Republican has been a senator in Maryland since the Beatles in the 60s or even the 50s. However, Larry Hogan, not the most conservative Republican in the world, but a Republican nonetheless, he's out of work right now. And running in an open seat is a lot different than the prospect that he had in 2022, which would be running against incumbent Chris Van Hollen. Could Larry Hogan actually jump into this race, and could he win a Republican in Maryland?
Remember last cycle, even though Hogan kept saying, I'm not interested, he did not definitively rule it out until basically a couple of days before the filing deadline. Now, I don't have any particular insight into what he's thinking right now, but he's probably very bored. You know, he went from 8 years as governor to sitting on the sidelines watching Wes Moore try and undo as much of his legacy as is humanly possible, as quickly as possible. And I think that a very quick way for him to remain relevant on the national scene, which I think he clearly wants to do, is to run for U.S. Senate. Now, we obviously know it's sometimes very hard for popular governors, and Hogan is the most popular governor in Maryland history. But it's very difficult for them sometimes to translate that state-based appeal onto the federal side. We saw this with Bill Bredesen in Tennessee running for Senate. We saw that with Steve Bullock in Montana running for Senate. Could Hogan win an open Senate seat in Maryland? I think it's certainly possible. And I've been tracking his statements. I don't see them myself as definitive no's. And I think that it would be foolish for him to say a definitive no until we have a better sense of what 2024 is going to look like. But as I look at the Democratic field, I could see him just wiping the floor with any of these people.
We got to leave it there, Matt Foley. Make no mistake, Larry Hogan would be a Republican in the Senate in the same style as Susan Collins or Mitt Romney. But again, I want to reiterate, this is a legislative body, and the more Republican bodies you've got, then you've got the majority, and that's all that matters. There's more to come on O'Connor tonight.